We often think of animals as being pretty consistent from place to place. After all, if you find a giraffe in Kenya, it's going to look pretty much identical to a giraffe found in South Africa. But that's not always the case. On a few rare occasions, we find animals that have evolved differently in different places, and sometimes those differences can be really stark. That's what we're talking about today, specifically places where animals evolved so differently that they ended up looking totally different, but are still considered the same species. These are microhabitats. Welcome to my channel. Microhabitats are areas that are isolated enough to keep populations of animals or plants separate, long enough for them to evolve independently, but not so far removed that speciation occurs. Speciation is just the process of forming new species. So these microhabitats represent like an almost species kind of situation, which is pretty neat. And while it does happen with plants more than animals, because animals tend to move around a lot more and mix with other populations, there are some pretty great examples in the animal world. So let's talk about a few of them. First, we have to talk about Darwin's finches, arguably the most famous example of microhabitats in action. They're found only in the Galapagos Islands, and scientists know a lot about them. The 18 different species of Darwin's finches all seem to have evolved from one ancestral population of white-throated warblers that flew over from the mainland of Ecuador sometime between 2 and 4 million years ago. Once they arrived, they quickly diversified into the various species we see today, each adapted to their own particular niche on the islands. Some eat insects, some eat fruit, some eat cactus. And the differences between them go beyond just their diet. Over time, they've evolved different beak shapes, body sizes, and colors based on the environment that they've inhabited. For example, finches that live on islands with larger, tougher seeds tend to have thicker, stronger beaks. This would make sense since they need to be able to crack open those seeds to get to the nutritious insides. On the flip side, the finches that live on islands with smaller, softer seeds don't need such strong beaks and have evolved to have thinner, more pointed ones instead. Body size is another trait that has changed across the different species of Darwin's finches. The finches that live on islands with more predators tend to be smaller, which makes sense because bigger bodies mean more time to grow up and reach sexual maturity. But then there's also less time before you die of old age, leaving less time for natural selection to act on your traits. So smaller bodies might be advantageous in these situations. And remember, sexual selection also plays a role here. Sexual selection is basically when members of the opposite sex choose who they want to mate with, usually preferring mates with certain preferred traits. So if females prefer to mate with smaller males, then smaller males will be more successful at reproducing and passing on their genes. In fact, one study found that sexual selection may be the primary force acting on the evolution of Darwin's finches, with most of the differences between species being driven by female preferences. If this is true, it's yet another example of how females are the ultimate arbiters of what traits are selected for in a species. We've talked about this in previous videos, but basically females are the ultimate gatekeepers of reproduction and therefore control which traits are passed down through generations. So the next time someone tells you that men are the ones who decide what traits are adaptive, you can confidently point them towards this video and let them know that that is wrong. Anyway, you get the idea. Darwin's finches are a classic example of microhabitats. One ancestral population becoming many different populations due to different selective pressures in different environments. Our next example is a little bit weird and possibly even creepier. There are multiple populations of cave-dwelling fish in the eastern United States and Mexico that have evolved to be totally blind. Now, this isn't actually something that happens in caves per se, but in underwater caves. But still, the end result is the same: blind fish. These fish are all part of the Astyanax genus, which lives above ground in streams and rivers and are all pretty similar. But there are several populations that have moved into underground caves and evolved into a different kind of fish. And yeah, they're blind. They have no eyes or eyelids, and their head shape is different from their surface-dwelling cousins. It seems like all of these different populations of cavefish independently moved into caves around the same time that North America was hit by a mass extinction event. Basically, there were tons of fish fossils found at the bottom of caves, indicating that fish had suddenly gone extinct in these areas and allowed the cavefish to take over. But it's not quite that simple. You see, all of these different populations of blind cavefish aren't actually the same species. Instead, they're split between two separate lineages. And it seems like once they moved into the caves, they became isolated from each other and evolved independently. Scientists still aren't sure exactly why cavefish are blind, but it's probably related to not needing eyes in an environment without any light. Also, a lack of pigmentation, known as albinism, is common among these populations as well. And this makes sense, because what use do you have for pigment if you're never going to see it? Although it's not universal among cavefish, some species retain their vision and color even after living in caves for hundreds of thousands of years. So it seems like losing these traits might be an advantage in caves. If we're thinking about this right, it could also explain why cavefish often have longer, thinner bodies than their surface-dwelling relatives. It could be that this body shape allows them to more easily navigate the tunnels of underwater caves. Whatever the advantages, these cave-dwelling fish are truly bizarre creatures, and a great example of microhabitats in action. Next up, let's talk about anolis lizards. There are lots of species of anolis lizards found throughout the Caribbean and the southern United States, but nowhere are they more diverse than on the island of Hispaniola. Here, there are 7 different species of anolis that all live together in a kind of lizardy microhabitat cacophony. 5 of these species live exclusively on the island, while the other 2 can also be found on nearby islands. And again, they all seem to have evolved separately from each other. The most obvious differences between them are in their color patterns, but they also have different body shapes and sizes, along with different behaviors. 4 of the species are mostly green and spend most of their time in trees, while the other 3 are brown and spend most of their time on the ground. And each of these groups seems to have evolved independently from the other. The tree-dwelling lizards are all medium-sized, around 5 inches long as adults, with slender bodies and long tails. Meanwhile, the ground-dwelling lizards come in a wide range of sizes, from small, slender lizards to large, bulky ones. And their tails are also shorter and more robust than their tree-dwelling counterparts. Again, these differences probably came about because the different environments favored different traits. Being small and slender might be good for climbing trees, while being bigger and bulkier might be better for navigating the underbrush. And of course, there's the whole color thing. Lizards that hang out in trees are often green, which helps them camouflage against leaves, and lizards that hang out on the ground are often brown, which helps them blend in with sticks and rocks. Overall, the anolis lizards of Hispaniola are a great example of adaptive radiation, which is the rapid evolution of many species from a single ancestral population. And like Darwin's finches, they've done it in multiple directions, filling different niches on the island. Microhabitats are pretty neat, huh? It's crazy to think that animals can evolve so differently in such a short amount of time. And it shows just how powerful natural selection can be. It also shows how important it is to study these things. Like, imagine if we hadn't studied Darwin's finches or cavefish or anolis lizards. We might never have known that these things were happening. And that's a real shame because it's amazing to see how life finds a way to adapt and overcome. So I hope you enjoyed learning about some of the weird and wonderful animals that inhabit our planet. And I hope you learned something new. If you did, please subscribe and leave us a like. And if you have a suggestion for a future episode, leave that down below too. Thanks for watching. See ya.